We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that you really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisades Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. We have a bit of a special episode for this one. Joining me tonight is Peter from Russia. He's actually a listener of the show. And after the Luke Groman interview, he commented and we kind of got in touch and had a conversation the other day. I have vetted him and, like I say, had a previous conversation with him. And he brought some interesting things to light that I hope that the audience is going to find very captivating. So his comment said, "I've been a fan of the show for 2 years. I live in St. Petersburg, Russia. Many of the things your guests pointed out are true now. Limitations on brokerage accounts in other jurisdictions, unobtainium gold, limits to withdraw cash, stock exchange closed for days already and counting, etc. I am blessed to have partially prepared myself for all this mess." So Peter, welcome to the show. I'm very grateful to have you here.
Thank you, Tom. Let's start it.
So why don't we start by having you give us a little bit of your background, and then we can kind of go into what you're seeing from your side over there.
So in short, I was born in 40 years ago in the Soviet Union, and I was old enough to remember how it collapsed. I remember the long lines, just people waiting for food, and my family and father and mother just also requesting me to wait in those lines to just buy some bread. And I was waiting for 2-3 hours. So at least I could feel the emotions around that collapse of a state. Yeah. And then fast forward to today. So I graduated from economics department, and then I worked for 20 years in, let's say, in the finance field, working with major clients, biggest clients in Russia. And 5 years ago, let's say, 7 years ago, I became a CFO and a deputy CFO of one of the companies, worked 5 years there. And for the last 5 years, I've been, let's say, an external freelance finance advisor to several clients in Europe and in here.
So a lot of your focus and what you and I talked about the other day is more focused on the fact that you're actually an investor and, basically listener of the show. And you wanted to give us your perspective for what actually happens at a time like this, right?
Well, yeah, in terms of my investor life, so around 5 years ago, I realized that pretty much bought my house and I have a lot of, let's say, cash building up. I don't know what to do, so investigated a lot how to invest. And let's say I've been a retail investor in the stocks for 3 years, and 5 years ago was also a kind of cryptocurrency investor. And in terms of what's going on, the Russian stock exchange closed now for 5 days, and it's never happened this way for 3 years. Also, the other day I received a warning or notification from one of the international brokers that I'm using, that all the Russian nationals, we will kind of warn you, notify you that your account may be kind of suspended, or we may request you to close it and to get out of our brokerage account. And I can also understand them that maybe they don't want to be exposed to having anything to do with the Russian individuals these days. Mm-hmm. Another thing in terms of gold, so on Sunday, in terms of gold, I've been buying golden coins like for 5 years now. And normally the spread between the purchase and the acquisition price and the purchase and the sales price to go gold coin dealers should be like 5%, 4%. And now on Sunday, when I logged in and see it online, many of the coin shops, they just said we don't have the inventory. Now, unfortunately, it's better now, but the spread is like around 30 or 40% these days. So obviously, you don't want to buy gold coins at such a premium, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what about, let's say, ATMs? Is there a limit on the withdrawal? Like, how are you able to get cash, things like that?
Yeah, so on Sunday, I went to ATM shop and I tried to withdraw money, and the limit was 10,000 rubles, which is like 150 US dollars. And before that, there was pretty much no limit. Mm-hmm. I didn't check it over the last 4 days, but I'm pretty sure there is a limit. And the interesting thing is, in my bank, I have also a US dollar and euro account, and I can withdraw physical euros and US dollars in theory, from those ATMs. And the ATMs just said that we don't have currency, and you cannot withdraw physical US dollars or euros from your account.
Mm-hmm. So another thing that we kind of went over the other day is this idea of recency bias. So for those that don't understand that, it's basically the idea that the recent past is just going to continue. So how do you feel that might have affected you? And is there anything that you kind of wish that you could go back and prepare better for, or what would you have done different?
Well, it's, as we discussed, so no one could believe that this mess could have started. But let's say 2 weeks ago, before, or let's say 3 days before the conflict really became hot, I was, let's say, messaging with some of my friends and saying that something bad is brewing. And it was like emotional exchange. But I pretty much didn't take it into action. I didn't say, okay, why don't I at least sell some stock in the Russian stock exchange, change it to $2, change it to euros, maybe buy some extra golden coins, whatever. So it was pretty much, in terms of my investment decisions, it was pretty much the usual way. Mm-hmm. So obviously now I realized that I couldn't just connect, Obviously, I should have connected my emotions and my logical thinking with my investment decisions, which I didn't. Mm-hmm. And most likely that's because of the recency bias that on my subconscious way, I was saying this mess can never happen. The war doesn't happen here. We have decent governments. Everything is going to be fine. They're just playing games. It's all bluff. And no, logically, and thinking back, I realized I was just kind of comforting myself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel that maybe part of that decision not to take action was in any way, shape, or form because of, not getting correct information, let's say from the media over there? Or do you feel that the media, and from all the research that you've done, is portraying things accurately? Let's say the mainstream media over there portrays things accurately to you.
No, I'm not watching television, so I'm not exposed too much to mainstream media. So mm-hmm. I'm just logging into some sites. But also I'm watching a lot of YouTube videos from that are also covering this conflict. Yeah, that's now became a hot one. And I remember just the night before the hot phase started, that expert said, I got really bad feelings. Everyone in Kiev, everyone and everywhere in Ukraine, just get out of the cities, buy some food, and just press on gas and just move out from there. because I have information that the Russian army is putting those Z letters on their tanks and on their machinery, which is like a clear signal that the hot phase is about to begin. So in a way, I was warned, and had enough information to act. So the mainstream media did not play a lot of role in my not acting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So this tends to kind of hit home for you as well, because you have family on both sides of this conflict, right?
Yeah, just for everyone to understand. So I got an uncle in Kiev and his family, and pretty much the last time my father spoke with them, they were kind of saying that the military helicopters flying over and there's massive shooting in the park. We used to barbecuing together like 20 years ago. And on the other side, I got my wife's second cousin who's from Donetsk, Donbass, and he's been pretty much fighting this war for the last 8 years.
Mm-hmm. So when we think about, let's say, what this conflict is about, is your understanding that Putin is basically just trying to keep NATO out of his backyard and has finally just had enough and put his foot down and is not going to accept that encroachment anymore? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. And the last drop or the last snowflake or the last straw that broke the camel's back, and why Mr. Putin did such a, let's say, emotional decision in a way, and put all the history and the current state and the future of our country at stake, was the threat, or say the speech that Mr. Zelensky gave at the Munich conference, whereby he just said, now the Ukraine is gonna build nuclear weapons, and everyone in that conference room, they just applauded him. And of course, that's an unacceptable threat for the Russian state. Mm-hmm. And that's why they had to act. So that's how I see why we had this hot phase started.
So what do you think would be a reasonable resolution? Like, do you get any information towards what, let's say, the goals of Putin are at this time?
Well, he's clearly saying that he wants to demilitarize Ukraine, which kind of suggests that he wants to take all of it and get rid of all their weaponry. Number one, and number two, denazify it. So he wants to get rid of all those neo-Nazi elements that he's claiming are brewing and are living happily in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. The other side saying some different things. So they're saying we have to have a ceasefire. You have to withdraw troops. And one of the even representatives on those peace talks, he's saying, and moreover, you get to withdraw troops from Donetsk, from Donbass region, and from the Crimea. When I saw that, I said, "Wow, maybe you should set." And also, you got to withdraw from Moscow, just to make it so impossible to meet such a demand. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So obviously, it shows that the both sides are not ready to have a serious negotiation so far. But also, to be objective, yesterday I've seen the message that there was a second round of talks, and the parties, at least on paper, agreed that they would organize humanitarian corridors for people, for normal people to leave the cities, because obviously the humanitarian situation is really terrible there. Because no one could have prepared, the city could not have prepared for not having food supplies and water supplies for 7 days. Mm-hmm. So obviously all those people have to leave and run away. And that's also what is happening on let's say on the front lines, is that I see that pretty much the Ukrainian army, they have pictures and videos of that. They're using their own population as a human shield, like the terrorists were doing that in Syria. So that's kind of also really, really surprised me. So if you're really a defender of your country, why you should be hiding behind your own citizens, not your some unknown foreigners, but behind your own citizens. So it's kind of really a big contradiction in my head.
Mm-hmm. And when we're thinking about this, let's say this hot zone that's obviously being covered heavily. You had kind of mentioned to me the other day that there have been conflicts like this that don't get this kind of coverage. So can you remind me of that example, if you would?
Yeah, of course. So the last example is the war in Iraq 20 years ago when the States took over Saddam's regime and installed their own. I believe more than 2 million people died over the course of this 20 years. So how much you heard about that in the mainstream media in the States and in the West? I think none. But also I can say that I had a chance to visit Baghdad and Basra 2 months ago. So 20 years passed, and their cities are still half in rumble. In half of the city is destroyed. People are living in favelas, most of them, yeah. Mm-hmm. And they still haven't recovered. And obviously no one in the mainstream media in the West is talking about this. Mm-hmm. And that's also one of the fears I have, that the intention of the West is not kind of to resolve this conflict as quickly as possible, but just to drag Russia and Ukraine to such a war that it's going to be, let's say, the second Syria, the second Iraq, and then all those cities, big cities in Ukraine, they become like Stalingrad, nowadays Stalingrad, or Aleppo city in Syria. Mm-hmm. It was under siege by the terrorists for like 5 years or so. And I can imagine what happened there. And there's a lot of footage about that on YouTube if you want to explore. Mm-hmm. So what was happening in Aleppo was really horrendous. I was following that like 5 years ago. Really, it's such scenes for a human being to see them. It's really tragic. Yeah, mm-hmm. I could put it that way. So obviously I'm scared and I fear that this thing can become like several Aleppo cities in Ukraine. It's going to be really tragic, and the human sacrifice will be maybe many thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people. So in a way, I was also psychologically affected, as you might guess, and I told you previously. Yes, so when the hot phase started, pretty much couldn't sleep for 4 nights. Yeah, mm-hmm. So it's pretty much just recently can sleep in a normal way mm-hmm. again. Yeah, obviously, just for your audience, if you're not sleeping for 3 days, it affects your logical thinking, and you cannot plan. You cannot make a good long-term plan in that situation.
So at this point, have you had to kind of resort to transacting in gold or anything like that? Or is most of the day-to-day life in St. Petersburg, relatively normal, minus finances?
Oh, so far it's pretty good. I was scared that, maybe there would be some hacker attack and all those banks, or at least their payment systems would be closed. Mm-hmm. And so let's say I have cash to transact for just cash and rubles to transact for, say, a month or two, or just to buy basic things for myself and my family. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it has not happened. So you can still transact in credit cards. You can use Samsung Pay, Apple Pay, Google Pay to transact. At least so far. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. But I've seen messages that the banks were kind of also not warning, but notifying people that they should have their credit card with them, not just iPhone or their smartphone with their payment app over there. And it shows that they were not scared, but they were just giving warning that this smartphone payment systems, they may be shut down or cut off or whatever. Other than that, the life so far in St. Petersburg is like normal. I haven't seen anything different over the last 10 days, 7 days.
Have you seen prices on, let's say, gasoline or food or anything for that matter escalate dramatically with the fall of the value of the ruble?
Not yet. But to be frank, I'm not a driver. I'm not driving car. I'm just calling taxi, and the prices for taxis have not changed.
Okay.
That's for sure. The prices for food haven't changed, but I think we should wait a couple of months and maybe a year just to see the inflation take itself, and I think it will, because the ruble so far it's lost around 25-30% of its value over the course of this, let's say, last 2 weeks. But I would say that it's not like that dramatic, because it could have been worse, and the history of the currency exchange shows that, let's say, in 1999, where there was this collapse in government bonds in Russia, I think the price of US dollar it tripled in the course of, let's say, 10 days or something, only in months. So it has not been that bad so far. Obviously, it's too early to say it has stabilized. We need some time, to see what will be going on. Also, in terms of the currency exchange, the spreads. So I'm just logging into my bank and see and check whether I can exchange euros and US dollars into rubles and or buy it. And I also see that the spreads are tremendous. Normally. It should be less than 1%. The spread between the purchase price for currency and the sales price at the bank. Now it's almost like 20-25%, which is kind of suggesting that it's too risky either to buy it or sell it, because you may end up on another side of the trade, and you should just wait until all resolves.
And that's on top of the devaluation already.
Yeah. So if the official rate is, let's say, 110 rubles, then what the bank says in their app is that you can buy it for 120 and sell it to a bank for 100. So that's what I'm saying. The spread. What else? But also I've been kind of surprised in a positive way so far, because I've seen messages from the central bank and the government of Russia, and they're saying to the large companies, that you can, if you have spare cash, you can organize buybacks of your shares. And before, it was unheard of for government companies to have buybacks. So. And I can just imagine how much cash now Gazprom is pumping at the price of $3,000 to $2,500, and if it goes on like for 1-2 years, so let's see, of course, how it goes. They can easily buy the whole free float of Gazprom for the free cash they have, especially at the such low prices that were there like 5 days ago, and I can imagine that there should be like an emotional reaction once the stock exchange opens, and they should even get lower.
So we had kind of discussed what investments at this time are interesting to you. So explain to us your thinking around that, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, as a human, as a citizen, I just have to make up my mind. So if I'm really want to stay inside this country for the long term, then pretty much there's no other way for me than just to continue investing here, hoping that everything's going to be fine. Because in the worst case situation, I can imagine that we may have an internal conflict of our own, and that there might be change in government, and there might be some internal tensions here, to put it mildly. So, of course, there are risks involved in that area as well. So, but if I'm not kind of ready to stay here for the long term, then the best thing to do is for me just to move out of the country and stay out of it. But the trouble with that now is that also I'm getting all messages from my friends and from, my other source of information that the anti-Russian hysteria has begun in Europe and in the States. Some students who are there in Europe, the professors are just saying, we're not giving you any lessons, just go back to your country. Some professors who've been teaching for the last 20 years and living for the last 20, 30 years in the States, they've been given notification that they are kind of sacked and their services are no longer needed. So it's really a hard choice, because why should I go somewhere where my kids will be finger pointed at and would be discriminated for their ethnic background?
And that's such shame seems like such a mild word to express that, but it's not the Russian people that are doing this, right? It's the leadership. And in a way, Putin decided that he had to put his foot down. So like, what is the mood like? Is everybody kind of understanding and or supportive of this move in some ways?
I think so. Like most of the vast majority of the people support the president, and of course there's a kind of if you log into mainstream media in the West or even open the Facebook, they just show, let's say, 100 people or 300 people protesting against this hot face. Let's say in major cities, but just imagine St. Petersburg has got 5-6 million of population and 300 people, or even 1,000 are protesting in the street. So it's pretty much nothing. Yeah,
that's actually something I wanted to ask you about, is if you've seen any of these protests, or, if that's a fairly widespread mood in let's just say St. Petersburg itself.
No, it's just a small starter. So I think those protests are the same size that when the opposition leader, as they call him in the West, Mr. Navalny got arrested. So the protests are not larger, at least as far as I can see from reading St. Petersburg related news. Well, of course, it's just the beginning, so there's no guarantee it's going to stay this way. Yeah,
true. So I was reading something the other day, Peter, it struck me as, frankly, almost unbelievable that Putin's approval rating is something like 71%. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah. Even when there was an election several years ago for another presidency of Mr. Putin, so we got around that number, 65, 75. And I've seen those kind of opposition messages, opposition articles saying, they are overcounting his votes, etc. But at the end of those articles, I could clearly see that the amount of votes that are kind of overcounted in his favor is like 5-10%. So even if you believe those opposition kind of leaders, which you also have to be skeptical about, then the approval rating is not, let's say, 70%, it's 60%. So what does it change in the long run? Yeah. So Maybe it's been done by the, let's say, the local elites and the local governments, just to please Mr. Putin and say, okay, see you, 70% rating. But clearly he's got more than the majority, that's for sure.
Which is, just crazy to think, because I want to say I saw something that, for example, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau's approval rating is somewhere below 20% at this point. And even Joe Biden's approval rating is below 40%. So to see Putin have such a high approval rating, in relation to these other leaders, it paints a completely different picture than the way Putin is portrayed in the West. But again, we kind of touched on this the other day, and I asked you how you feel that the Russian government handled COVID, and if there was any reason for the public to start to distrust the government because of the way that they handled COVID. I think in the West, there has been a massive misuse of public trust in some ways, because there was a lot of messaging that was very inconsistent at best. So how do you feel that public trust is handled? And maybe we can use COVID as an example of that.
Yeah, what I can say is that although the local opposition were shouting from every corner that the government is mishandling this COVID-19 situation, I just can give you a brief comparison of what went, how it evolved in Europe. Based on discussions with some of my friends over there and how it was handled here. So just to give you a perspective, the schools were just closed for 2 months, starting from April 2020 till the end of May 2020. Ever since then, my kids went to school with no single day of, staying inside. Just compare that. I'm not sure how it went in the States, but I can sense it's something similar to Britain, where the people, where children stayed inside for a year or something. Just one example. Another example is this QR codes and all those restrictions to visit public places. They were mild here as well. So you could again, those malls, big malls, shopping malls were closed for, I think, 2 to 3 months, or maybe 4. And then those food courts and the restaurants were closed for something like that. But ever since then, you could easily attend them and go shopping. Another thing, this QR codes, system, where you cannot pretty much enter any mall or any public place without having this QR code about being vaccinated. They were just, they started appearing, was that in November last year or December? So while in Turkey, where I went, let's say in summer, that was also the reality. And the same thing, I think, is in the Western Europe, where pretty much those restrictions were much harsher. So, in a nutshell, it was pretty good if you compare it with other developed nations.
And obviously, you look at things from, let's say, not a mainstream point of view. You're informing yourself of what's going on in the rest of the world from, let's say, alternative news sources. So you're seeing a lot of, let's say, the same stuff that, a lot of us are looking at as well, right?
Yeah, sure. So I lost all the faith in the mainstream media like around 10 years ago, and decided not to even watch TV and get my information from either the internet or any YouTube channels that I'm watching.
So Peter, what do you think kind of set you on this course of starting to save in gold and let's say not spending everything you make?
Yeah, I think we discussed that. It's maybe it's my kind of childhood that I remember all the hard times, that my family and my country went through. It's number one, and number two, it's something to also to do with my family specific. So I don't remember my father ever overspending or going out for fancy dinner somewhere. So whatever money he made, whatever was left, he pretty much invested it in building his own house with his own hands and using his own labor. And he's been doing that for like more than 20 years now. And so it's also, as we discussed, it's maybe also this intergenerational trauma. It's also helped that, because I remember my grandma, she's still alive. And she was telling me like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, about what she had to go through in the World War II times, where the Nazis just took her as a, let's say, 5 or 7 years old girl and took her from the village, and she went somewhere with them marched with them for many, many, many days. And when they were back to their village, out of the 100 houses, 99 houses were burned. And so they had to pretty much live in the woods. They had to dig kind of a hole in the ground just to stay there temporarily while they rebuild the village. But also she was I remember she was explaining to me all the famine that everyone went through after the end of the World War II. Pretty much it lasted for several years. And so that's in specific. So the way I started this thinking about this gold and silver is when I was in Turkey. I saw all those golden coin shops, and they were kind of so much spread out. So you can pretty much see in every corner and just say, wow, why are they selling gold? Why are they selling gold? And why don't I buy at least a couple of coins for myself? And that's how I got into that. And obviously, over the last 8 years, something, I've been watching a lot of YouTube shows, and where many people, like, let's say, James Rickards, were appearing, and read some of his books, and it helped to shape my mind. But again, the foundation for that might have been this my family and the intergenerational trauma that the Russian people suffered through.
Yeah, and like you were telling me the other day, your grandma didn't really reveal any of those stories until much later in your life, right?
Yeah. I think she didn't want to, let's say, trauma me, put me in pain when I was a little kid. So we had those conversations when I was, let's say, 30 years, like 10, 15 years ago.
And it's funny, the other day, again, when we were speaking, you had a couple of Rick Rule quotes. So it's interesting, being obviously so far away. I mean, I think we're something like, what did we say the other day? 12 or 18 hours difference between your time zone and mine right now?
It's 10 hours. Yeah.
So 10 hours difference. And yet we're learning a lot of the same things. It's interesting to think about in that way, that we're being exposed to the same types of information when we're reading, James Rickards' books, listening to Rick Rule and some of these experts.
Yeah, on that front, I can say that all people are interconnected, and what I see and what I experience from dealing with, let's say, other cultures, is that the basic needs of all people are the same. So when the political leaders want to portray people as really different from each other, and different cultures is really different, but at least on the basic level, that is not like that. What I also can say, like, really the obvious thing, the more different people interact between each other, the more kind of value they can bring to each other in a constructive way. But with all this conflicts, with all this weaponry building up, etc., that's not helping humanity. go in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Also, another thing I was about to say is that I really got shocked when I discussed this nuclear threat by Mr. Putin the other day with my friends in the Western Europe, and they said, "Relax, you're just over exaggerating. It's a kind of a bluff." And I said, maybe you're right, but my thinking is we're closer to a nuclear exchange. Maybe we were not this close to nuclear exchange with the West in like 40 years. So, of course, I'm not a military expert, but when the Mr. President is saying something like that, okay, get ready, nuclear troops. You have to now be on alert, be on a standby, be on duty 24 hours a day and double duty, etc., etc. That's clearly indicating that even if he's not really, even if the Russian state has not really uncovered its nuclear sword in full, then at least it's showing, let's say, a 10% or 20% of that. And so you can guess that it's not a sign of a good development. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in that same vein, Peter, what do you think some important lessons are, let's say, that you've learned that you'd like to share and maybe reinforce with our audience?
Well, in terms of personal security and personal plan, disaster plan, you should always kind of pressure test it, and you should think over it again, because, like, personally, I could have never guessed that the Russian stock exchange would be all closed for 5 days now. But although I have this knowledge, and I knew that even 5 years ago that the New York Stock Exchange was closed for 6 months when the First World War broke out. Mm-hmm. And another thing is, I keep a lot of my funds in the bonds, in the government bonds and private companies bonds in Russia. And I could have never imagined that it's, I don't have even an opportunity to sell them, because that's the most liquid, should be the most liquid market on the stock exchange, the bonds. But and I was always viewing them in a way as a bank deposit, so I can like a really something really close to a cash equivalent, so I can sell it any day and use it for either for my further investment purposes. I would like to buy some really oversold shares on the really emotional feelings. Or I could just convert some of that bonds and use it for my, let's say, everyday life. But as the reality showed, I'm not able to do it right now. So it's not really equivalent of cash, or even a bank deposit.
So what about from let's say, a non-financial standpoint? Do you think that having some other, like, let's say, food or stuff like that was a good idea as well?
Yeah, sure. So we increased our kind of food stock, not like to a huge extent, but what else did we do? So we bought 2 years worth of supply of medicine. So my son has to take some medicine, and that's being produced in the Western Europe. So normally I used to have like 3 months, 4 months of supplies. Just in case, but now I increase it to 2 years, because maybe that medicine is never going to be here anymore. Nobody knows. Also, obviously, what your guests have been saying, that living in a small city, at least having a small city relative or something as a backup plan is always a good thing, because just imagine, in case of course, God forbid, but in case of really the hot war between the West and Russia, so St. Petersburg is going to be number 2 target on the list, of the Western military. So it doesn't create a lot of comfort, So, so if you're living somewhere in a distant place with not too much population, not too much not too many factories, that's also a good thing to do, or at least have it somewhere as a backup plan.
Excellent, Peter. Well, is there anything else you'd like to touch on before you wrap up? I'm really grateful for your time and your perspective from the ground there.
Yeah, thank you for Tom for reaching out to me. It was a pleasure, and I'm really thankful for all the work you've been doing for the last years.
Well, in some ways, that's the least I can do. I'm glad you found some value and some education in it, and I really appreciate you reaching out as well and sharing your story with us. It's great to be able to get your perspective and to see really what life is like at a time like this. Obviously, it would be different in the Ukraine, but even in a quote unquote safe place at this point in the conflict, life isn't exactly rosy.
Yeah, maybe you should find a Ukrainian guest on your show. I'm sure he'll be more emotional about what's going on.
Well, I absolutely couldn't blame them for being a bit more emotional. And, it's kind of reminds me of the same point that Luke and I made at the end of that interview, that it's never a bad thing to be prepared before things like this happen, right?
Yeah, maybe the last thing I wanted to note is that the West froze the Russia's bank reserves, and they like about $300 billion US dollars. And I know it happened before with Iran and Venezuela, but their reserves were like $2 billion. And yeah, you can imagine the Russian government just said the West are the crooks and they're thieves, and in a way they have a point about that. And I can imagine what other countries like China or India, even Japan are thinking, because it creates a risk for them as well. Yeah, holding U.S. treasuries in their reserves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Peter, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you and your family are safe and well.
Thank you, Tom.
Take care. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.